A glass to the past, and the ladies cross the ages, fallen fathers from the motherland whose lives are on the pages. And the bottle said it best when he told us all the world's a stage. So fellas, grab a glass and lift your spirits to the seventh age. Welcome one and all to the Seven Ages Audio Journal. It's time once again to pour up a glass and pull up a chair as we gather together here in our very favorite corner of the Cross Time Pub, meeting in good company and in one of our favorite historic places to discuss changes in the past while the winds of change are blowing outside, quite literally, and that is probably truer for no one here at least than it is for James Waldo, who in the great state of Arkansas is now in the line of fire, aren't you, sir?
Yes, sir. We are riding the storm out right now. So Hurricane Laura, we're right at what used to be the eye wall is sitting right on top of us. So it's really coming down outside. And I may lose power, maybe cats and dogs living together. Who knows what'll happen?
That's right. Well, I hope it's not as bad down your way, Jason.
No, hot and miserable as we have come to expect here in the Southeast. But, house renovations continue up to my eyeballs in paint and other projects, ripping out bushes and mowing lawns and all the good stuff that comes with a brand new home. But nothing a little Modelo can't fix. And we're getting close to moving in, so we're pretty happy about it.
That is right. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, my glass isn't even half empty. It's completely empty. I have no beverage tonight. This is rather strange, considering that we are in the Cross Time Pub and yet in separate states all at once. Still trying to figure that out. I guess, Marty, I'm not thinking fourth dimensionally. But I was certainly traveling through time and space, looking at the temporal and the spatial relationship between time and cultures yesterday, and it was quite by accident. I was helping my good friends, Laura and Tim, move into their new home. And their young daughter, Naomi, is quite the young citizen scientist. And at one point, she was looking around the yard and saying, Micah, let's check out the woods over here and see what things look like. And so we were taking a break from the heavy lifting and moving boxes into the house. And we just walked over to the edge of the yard. And I noticed a little scattering of little stones, mostly quartz and things. And I actually first reached down just to grab a little hunk of quartz, but as I was reaching for it, I saw another laying right next to it, the unmistakable workmanship of ancient hands. And indeed, this looks like a little broken fragment of it's not even a fragment, really just the tip's broken off, but it's a Guilford probably. So we're looking at an archaic point, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 to 7,000 or so years old. I was very excited to find that. That's almost like an omen to me that you are moving into a new house, and one of the first things that you find is a little archaic point laying there. Broken though it was, she was really excited, and Naomi grabbed it, ran off, showed it to Mom and Dad. I told them she found it, But she was so excited that when we all wrapped up, she wrote me a little note, and it said, "Thank you for helping me find the arrowhead. Let's talk about science again soon." I thought that was great.
That earlier, I had no idea what the note was for. I get it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old is she?
Well, she is 10 years old.
That's great. You're moving into a new property, and we'll take that as a good sign and just tell them to keep their eyes peeled.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a beautiful place. I just, again, it's hard not to find beauty in western North Carolina, but where they're way out in the woods. It's just a gorgeous location. And, I think my only real regret so far this summer is coming back to James's situation with weather. It's been so rainy, I haven't had as much time outdoors this summer as I normally would. And before you know it, it's going to be gone. I had that moment of realization the other day. It seems like it was March and everybody was hunkering down and staying indoors. We were coming back from assisting down there at White Pond. All of a sudden, we're looking at September. Where did 2020 go? I don't know that I'm really arguing, because 2020 being the weird year that it is, I can't really say I'm going to be sad to see it go. But Yikes, time really does fly. I must be getting old, guys.
Yeah, well, we're getting into the fall now, which is my favorite time of the year, and Halloween decorations are already at the stores. My 4-year-old's already, want to look at costumes and all that, and nobody knows what, Halloween's going to look like this year, but, at the very least, he's excited to see the decorations and the costumes coming back into stores. So, fall is my favorite time of the year, and I'm definitely looking forward to maybe taking that time to get some hiking done. Who knows, if things calm down a bit, maybe we can even get back out there and have another road trip.
Yeah. That actually would be really nice. And Halloween's also my favorite holiday. I love this time of year. But did you know that Halloween falls on a Saturday this year?
Well, it won't be as much fun as it has been in years past if we have to do trick-or-treating on Zoom calls. I don't really think that would work, would it?
Just put the bucket of candy at the end of the driveway and let everybody have at it.
Yeah. Well, everybody's going to be wearing masks, or should be. So Halloween masks, do those count?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite the same thing. But I tell you, there was definitely cause for celebration on the site of a recent salvage dig, where Israeli archaeologists announced that they found something really unique. Have either of you guys seen this story?
No, I haven't.
So.
That's right. Yeah, this was actually a trove of early Islamic gold coins that were found. There were about 425 complete gold coins. According to CBC.ca, most of these dated to the Abbasid period, around 1100 years ago. It was considered an extremely rare find, according to Israel Antiquities authorities. They further report here that this trove, which was unearthed by youth volunteers, also included hundreds of smaller clippings from gold coins that would have served as smaller denominations. But just imagine, you're one of those kids, you're volunteering on a salvage dig, and you unearth a pot full of more than 400 gold coins. Yeah, again, it really makes me wish that I were out there this year doing more archaeology.
That's a lot of milk money, man.
It certainly is. Well, the closest to a treasure I have come across in recent days has been a broken fragmentary arrowhead. But nonetheless, I told young Naomi when we found this, I said, this is like a little treasure from the past. And she remarked at one point, she said, I am gladly, proudly touching something that may have the germs of an ancient indigenous American on it. That's what she said. And I said, well, I don't know if there are still germs on it after thousands of years, but interestingly, there may indeed be proteins still present on that blade, which could be tested, and you might actually be able to reveal what that fragmentary spear point was actually used to hunt. So it wasn't gold coins we found, but it was still interesting. James, I often think of you when I'm out there in the field, though, because we always have to take into consideration the different kinds of stone that are used. And of course, in terms of the kind of preferential stones used by ancient Americans in the Carolinas, quartz, like we found, is generally a pretty inferior material. This certainly wasn't the best quartz I've seen either.
Yeah, so quartz is not that great, and it's because of the way it forms there in that, in that part of the world, or in that mountain range that's there. Places where quartz grows as actual crystals, like there's a place here not far from me called Hot Springs, Arkansas, and it's famous for quartz crystals. But the quartz that you see a lot of times in mountain ranges like the Appalachians in your area is quartz that has filled into the fracture system in the rock as a secondary process. So as water leached down through these rocks over the millennia, quartz would get dissolved into the water and make its way into these fractures and then precipitate out and then eventually harden again. And then it's just this weird kind of amorphous, not a very crystalline looking structure, even though it does have one, but, and it's very glass-like, but its interior crystal lattice makes it an inferior material really for lithics.
Yeah, it can be kind of crumbly too. And that was kind of in its own way beautiful, because it just reminded me, especially in these difficult times we're all in, commenting on 2020 and what a weird year it has been. Life does find a way, and we make do with what we have, and what we find a way to use. And I'm just fascinated by that. I think that maybe is one of the things I love about archaeology, because in a lot of ways, guys, it has really fundamentally changed the way I look at the world. And we have to remind ourselves sometimes how much we have these days, how much we have, more importantly, to be thankful for. Back in the day, things were a lot different. But guys, another interesting point had been the fact that she and I walked a little further down toward the edge of the yard, and there was a little washout area, and we could see fresh deer prints. And I said, Naomi, I spy something. What do you think I'm spying? And so she came over and she looked and she spotted the fresh deer prints. And I said, now think for a moment. These animals that we still see in your new backyard right now were here thousands of years ago. And the person who left this spear point very well may have been hunting these same animals. And so as much as things do change, many things also remain the same. And, you know,
That's true.
and this environment where you live remains essentially unchanged and the same way that it was maybe 5,000 years ago. It's just incredible.
Yeah. It kind of is incredible, you know, when you think of those things and all the people who have trod the same ground that you're on now and all the different lives they lived. But, you know, one thing I started thinking about when you said you found that point today is, I don't know how many you've found personally, and I'm sure Jason has, you know, found thousands. But
Look at this guy smiling.
0 points. I have never found a point of any kind anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's not like I haven't tried. Let me put it like that.
Well, yeah. You know, but I would actually say that doesn't surprise me because, you know, a lot of the work that we do, you know, we're assisting on a dig site or something like that. We're not actually out actively looking for surface finds. You know, your discipline having more to do with actual stone rather than what can be made of stone doesn't surprise me all that much. Now, you know, again, when I have been out like on a friend's property or something, we will find from time to time a little surface find like that. But I guess by virtue of the kind of work that Seven Ages does, we're just not in that position to make a lot of surface discoveries. We certainly do discover a lot of you guys out there, though, on social media and through the fine reviews people continue to leave via Apple Podcasts and other podcasting clients.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, we managed to get 2 new reviews between last episode and this episode. So we want to thank Dugans34 for a 5-star review titled Fantastic. Says, absolutely top-notch show, great host and guests. If you're interested in ancient peoples of America, archaeology, the Younger Dryas, and more, this show is a must. Plus, who doesn't love Micah's voice? Good point. And then we have a 5-star review from Dalek J titled Archaeology for the Rest of Us. Great podcast that focuses on the events of the distant past. They are not afraid to ask questions and bring in a variety of views and theories. If you're interested in what is going on 12 to 30,000 years ago, this podcast is for you. So again, big thanks to Dugans34 and Dalek J for those 5-star reviews. It really helps out the show. And so if you're a listener, take a couple of minutes to swing by your favorite app, iTunes, Apple Podcast, whatever it is that you use, and drop a review for 7 Ages. It really helps move us up so that other people can find and discover the show. Also, you can always find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, YouTube, where you can subscribe to our YouTube account. James takes care of that and uploads our new episodes so that you can listen to the podcast on there. You can also find some of our documentaries that we filmed, all available on the 7 Ages Research Associates YouTube page.
Excellent. Yeah. And, you know, I've actually gotten emails recently from a few of our listeners, which I haven't had an opportunity to respond to. I try to get back to emails. A lot of the time they end up getting buried. And right now, I think that the guys know here, I actually am awaiting a new pair of prescription glasses. It's kind of funny, though, because in the midst of all the craziness going on, these were ordered now a month and a week ago, and they still have not arrived. And so I'm kind of waiting on these new glasses because eye strain tends to set in pretty quickly without them. But hopefully in just a few more days, I'll be able to answer emails and comfortably read those which people have been sending. But I'm always excited to see emails from archaeological enthusiasts. And some of you guys have been reaching out, so we haven't forgotten about you. Hopefully we can get back to those, and maybe some we can even feature on a future edition of this program. But speaking of future editions of the program, there's somebody we have wanted to have on for a conversation now for quite a while. And we have really had some giants as far as archaeology goes in recent weeks, and we've got a few more to come as well. Some very well-known, influential archaeologists. But there are also a lot of those, what I think we could call unsung heroes, people who have contributed significantly to our knowledge of the ancient past, but who don't get as much time on television or in books or in magazine articles or even also in peer-reviewed journal papers. Although the gentleman who will be joining us soon has contributed to a few of those. And so I think it's about time for us to dive into this conversation with a good friend of the program and a guy who I think has really been an inspiration to all of us. Dr. Doug Sain will join us for a special conversation about southeastern archaeology and some of the controversial discoveries at sites like Topper when we return right here on the 7 Ages Audio Journal. Doug Sain is an archaeologist specializing in lithic technology and Paleoindian Archaeology. He was raised in North Carolina, where he attended Appalachian State University, a place I spent a lot of time back in the day. Still have some friends up there. And there at App State, he received his Bachelor of Science degree in Anthropology in 2003. He received his MA in Anthropology from Eastern New Mexico University in 2011. And his thesis research documents Clovis blade technology and technological organization at the famous Topper site. Now, Doug received his Ph.D. in anthropology in 2015 from the University of Tennessee. His dissertation, and this is part of the reason we're so interested in his work, evaluates evidence for pre-Clovis lithic technology there at the Topper site, which the team, of course, has been to several times ourselves. Doug has over 15 years of experience conducting archaeology in the Southeast and presently works as an archaeologist, as mentioned, for the Terracon Consultants in Columbia, South Carolina. So there is the official introduction. Doug, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And again, I'd mentioned that we have been a fan of your work for a long time. Now, how we actually finally first got to meet you was at one of the Southeastern Archaeology conferences, actually more than a year ago. So again, really good to see you again and to hear about what all you've been up to.
Yeah, it was like I said, I was there catching some presentations, and I was just so surprised. I'm like, wait, what? Somebody's here just to see me? And I'm like, it was kind of flattering.
Right. Well, what we all have in common, of course, really has to do with a love for archaeology in the Southeast. And Topper is such a dynamic site. There's so much stuff going on there. And to try and say that Topper is this or Topper is that, yes, it is a Paleo-Indian site. Yes, it was also occupied by later cultural manifestations. The most controversial viewpoints, of course, espouse perhaps earlier occupation and visitation to Topper, and that really opens up Pandora's box as far as what we know about the peopling of the Americas. Now, you, of course, were, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were first introduced to Topper as a grad student, right?
Well, actually, it was before I went to grad school. I was looking for work. I'd been working for the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, and some work fell through, and I was looking for a new job, and somebody introduced me to the good Dr. Al Goodyear, and one thing led to another, and I was fortunate enough to gain employment for several summers working under his wing, and then eventually he led me to several possible graduate programs, and I started graduate school shortly thereafter.
Okay, I didn't know that you'd been working there before you actually started the grad program. Yeah. And we've got a lot of friends who are Topper alumni, including Dr. Shane Miller, friend of ours. Last time we were at Topper, he was there with us, in fact. And, we have a lot of fond memories of that site, too. But when you first go there, I think it was breathtaking the first time I went there. But then Jason and I, when we had an opportunity, thanks to the gracious hosting that Shane Miller, Dr. Albert Goodyear and others, allowed us, which was, to come down, volunteer on the site, and also see some of the adjacent properties. Then I began to see the real full scope of what's happening at Topper. What we really have occurring here is an epicenter for a lithic industry that lasts thousands of years. It's a lot to take in when you really see the full scope of what's happening. And it wasn't just the, of course, Topper excavation site. It was that entire region really around it, where this remarkable chert is being harvested.
Exactly. I mean, people needed a number of resources in which to survive. Chert being one, water being another also being food resources. And these kind of all came together at this one very special place. And again, you see evidence of people occupying this area from the more modern recent past all the way back to Clovis and potentially, pre-Clovis as well.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting about Topper, actually, there's many things very interesting about Topper, but as we begin this conversation of the many strata that's there and the many centuries that it covers as a archaeological site, we use this term chert. And again, when we're talking about the value of a site, it's often the natural implements that you find there that make it so important. So as we're moving forward with this conversation about a site that was renowned for the material that was coming from it, James, I want to throw it over to you and give us some insight to what exactly is chert and why was it so valuable to these people.
Okay, so I actually was thinking of some other stuff I was going to talk about, especially with the site in regards to the geology. But chert is a kind of an unusual material. It's 100% silica. So and it precipitates out of water, or like seawater, and forms these beds. And sometimes it can also form as a secondary process from groundwater, in sandstone and like limestone and some other materials. And then often the way that the people were able to access it, especially at Topper, they were fortunate, through whatever accident of geology, that the rock beds there have been overturned or upturned. The rocks are folded. So what you get is these almost like walls of chert in some of those areas. And if those beds had not been exposed like that through mountain building and collisions of continents or what have you, those beds would probably still be buried deep in the ground, and the people there wouldn't have had access to them.
Yeah. And, before we get into the site itself, James, as a geologist, having been to the site yourself, what are your observations of the layout of the land and layout of the geology of the Topper site?
It's kind of that part of the country is kind of, rolling hills, and the soil itself is really, really sandy. And I think that's a lot of that's from, the older climate, especially during the last ice age when it was much drier. All that area through there was, sand dunes, very different than what we see today, which I didn't realize that about that part of the country until we started to get more involved in that. And then, in the valleys between these rolling hills, there's a lot of stream action, a lot of, water action down through there. And it exposes those beds of chert for people to get into, are able to access. And then, of course, the Savannah River is right there next to the Topper site. So honestly, it's kind of like you guys were talking about a few minutes ago, it's really, there's all of these factors that sort of come together that really make the whole thing possible and make it attractive for people to settle at or visit. And I'm sure that people traveled a long way to come there to take advantage of that area. And I'm sure there was probably a lot of different and disparate groups of people that were sort of coexisting and, sharing those resources and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with the geology being obviously the oldest implement there, and then we move forward in time, let's talk for a moment about Topper and the pre-Clovis artifacts, because it was 1998 when pre-Clovis was first discovered at Topper. Doug, were you there at that time when the first pre-Clovis started?
I was not there in 1998. My first year, I believe, would have been in 2005. But from what I understand and from the history that I've documented from what's been undertaken at the site, the goal of the excavations in the 1998 and 1999 field seasons at Topper were actually partially in response to some of the findings that they had at Cactus Hill.
Well, that makes sense, yeah, because Jason, when you and I went and spoke with Dr. Goodyear, One of the questions we'd actually had for him, we were interested in redstones at that time. Redstones in other parts of the country are recognized by different names, Gainey sometimes. Also, I think that Debert, if you go even further up to the northeast coast around Nova Scotia, slight differences perhaps in some of these different lithic types, but there are a lot of similarities. And actually, I've seen some refer to redstones as Gainies as they appear in the southeast. But the idea of the redstone interests us and how that ties together. And that makes sense what you're talking about there, Doug, because Jason and I, when we went and spoke with Dr. Goodyear at the university, maybe the second time that we ever went down there, we were asking about redstones and wondered, where have they been found in situ? Now, what we didn't know at the time was that a redstone, a very strange one, which maybe we can actually talk about this a bit, but one had been found at Topper. But in the literature, in the descriptions of some of the lithics that were retrieved from Cactus Hill, there also seemed to be descriptions of redstones. So it actually makes sense to me why people would have been interested in Topper. Naturally, if you have a Clovis presence, you're probably going to find similar lithics to those in other sites and locations and complexes throughout the region. What's really interesting was, of course, the decision to keep going deeper and deeper. But before we go really deep, even further back into the Pleistocene, let's talk about that redstone for a second. And Jason, maybe you could actually give us a little bit of a primer on what exactly a redstone is. And then I want to grill Doug on what they found and why it was unique.
Yeah, so redstone is a late paleo implement. So it's very similar to, in shape and size, to what you would expect of a Clovis point, being that it is a fluted point. However, one of the main differences is it's generally considered to be a tool-assisted flute versus what you consider a natural flute that you would accomplish through typical flint knapping. What that tool assisting does generally is runs a flute that's much more direct and generally longer than what you would expect on a Clovis implement. So another example of late paleo tool-assisted fluted types is the things like you see with Cumberlands, Folsom, things like that, where you have a flute that often carries all the way up to the distal end and then terminates off the end. So it's a late paleo, a post-Clovis, generally considered type of implement, but they tend to be located in the southeast, typically east of the Mississippi.
Yeah. One more interesting and important point I think that should be made about that tool-assisted fluting is that from time to time we see conjectures, because it is difficult. I'm actually looking at my beautiful projectile point sequence for South Carolina here that Dr. Chris Moore made for us. I've got it on this wall now so I can have it right here while I'm doing the podcasts. But
I got it right behind me here.
Yeah, we've all got one of these. And, but one of the most important things about that tool-assisted flute is that kind of helps. It's easy to spot if you know what you're looking at. And again, I don't profess to. I usually err to Jason on this. But what I do know, of course, is that helps you understand generally the progression of the tool-making styles. From time to time, we see conjectures about certain lithic types. This one may be older than we think. This one may be younger. And what's odd to me is I do see from time to time people speculating about what may be pre-Clovis technologies, which obviously have a tool-assisted flute, which to me suggests pretty evidently this is probably later than Clovis technology. Now, with regard to the redstone, again, we would call this probably a transitional point type, falling somewhere between and on the nearer side of Clovis and maybe something like Dalton. Let's talk about that redstone that was found there at Topper, because Dr. Shane Miller told us about that. Jason and I, the next day over at the White Pond site, spoke with Dr. Goodyear about it. He confirmed that there was an Ortho Quartzite redstone found. Why is that unique, especially at a place like Topper?
Exactly. Well, for one thing, this point is, at the time it was discovered, was quite unique in the sense that very few, if any, at the time, redstone points had been found in situ during an excavation. A lot of times you'd see these found on the surface by collectors or in disturbed contexts. And also, the material that the point was made of is also unique in the sense that it's Ortho Quartzite. And this being a chert quarry, you would expect to maybe see a chert point made out of the raw material. But in fact, it's Ortho Quartzite, which suggests that possibly people could have brought this in from elsewhere.
You gave an example, too, before we got on the mic, Doug, about where that Ortho Quartzite might have come, or Jason, it may have actually been you talking about where most of it would have come from, which gives us an idea of where someone might have brought that from, probably coming again to Allendale County looking for better quality material to work with.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally when we think of ortho quartzite in the state of South Carolina, we're thinking Berkeley County. At least that's the first area that comes to mind when I think of ortho quartzite, and so it's in a direct way of transitioning. It's not like it's 300 miles or something, but it's a pretty significant amount of mileage. I can't tell you off the top of my head how far it would be from Allendale to Berkeley County, and we're not saying for sure that this point came from Berkeley County. I mean, obviously there's other sources that would be available, but I'm just saying I generally think of that region and that area of South Carolina when I think of ortho quartzite material.
To me, the story that this tells, and why I would think that it's actually likely that came from further away, is it seems to talk about someone coming with inferior knapping material from further away, coming to Topper to get better material. And if you were going to be closer to Topper, why would you be using anything else? Why wouldn't you just be over there in Allendale County harvesting chert? For there to be something that strange that would turn up at a site like Topper, again, this is pure speculation on my part, but it would make more sense that someone brings this with them a great distance. They come to this quarry and they obtain much superior material than what they had, and they drop what they had with them when they arrived. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that this says some things maybe about the redstone technology, where it appears, but then again, as they are known under different names, they show up all up and down the East Coast. And Jason, I don't know if this one was it wasn't in the Paleoindian database, but you spotted one, at least a fraction of one that was recovered at the Galt site in Texas. So we know that they're at least turning up that far west as well.
Yeah, I mean, that we were literally flipping through a Texas A&M Press book that had been released, and I saw the picture from Galt of a redstone, and I spotted it right away. And I said, I remember at the day we were sitting at my kitchen table, and I said, Micah, look at this. I'm like, what is this doing here? And I even went as far as to contact Dr. Michael Waters and ask him about it directly. And his reply in his email was simply, "It is what it is."
Yep. And he kind of left it at that. Hey, but really quickly, James, I should add, Jason, do you remember we found one other redstone further west as well? Do you remember that?
Did we?
We did. Now, this one doesn't have quite as much supporting material, but after the one that you discovered, I began digging around on the archaeology forums and found a reference that a man made to finding a Gainey in West Texas, which to me,
that's right.
Yeah. So at that point, Jason and I, we were just on the track. I mean, we were going to find every redstone in America at that point. But again, what we were looking at was we were trying to understand point distribution, and I want to get into that with Doug here in a moment. But James, first jump in there, man.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, you guys remember the redstone that my neighbor owned that I brought up to Topper, or not Topper, but White Pond the first time we went there, and Uncle Al looked at it and was like, "Yeah, this is a redstone." We thought for sure it was a Clovis point. And it was a guy that lived 2 houses down that just like, hey, he knew we did this show. And he's like, let me show you, some of this stuff. And he picked it up, if I remember correctly, in Southwest Georgia along maybe the Altama River. He was just walking along the bank and looked down, and the thing was just laying there in the leaves. Not in the river. He was, I think he was out hunting or whatever. Yeah. But what I really want to talk about was ortho quartzite. We keep talking about it, but I don't think people really, who knows what ortho quartzite is, right?
You do probably. Why don't you tell us?
I do know. So, and what's significant about it is ortho quartzite in general is a metamorphic rock. So originally it was something else. In this case, quartzite is almost always like started out life as a pure quartz sandstone. And then later was acted on with pressure and heat, and was changed or metamorphosed into this other material. It has a different crystal lattice makeup in the structure or whatever. So in this case, quartzite in that part of the world is going to come from the Appalachian mountain range and some of the smaller ranges that are associated with that. And that's from the original collision of North America with Europe and Africa. I think somewhere around, I don't know, it's somewhere around 250, 300 million years ago. So it's pretty old rock, but you won't find this naturally down in the below the fall line in the coastal areas in South Carolina or any place on the East Coast, that material had to have come from up in the hill country or up in the mountains, and somebody had carried it there from that other area.
Yeah. So again, it tells a story. What you find and where you find it tells you something about who brought it there and where it came from. Doug, again, I know a lot of your work actually has to do with, you've in fact used the Paleoindian database in the past as part of your work, both in terms of looking at the possible Paleo-American, in fact, actually the very likely distribution of sites that are now underwater, but they would have been coastal regions toward the end of the Pleistocene. And of course, also your studies of lithic technologies at Topper. Since we've kind of been talking about Topper, maybe we'll kind of start right there, because looking at one of your papers here, Clovis blade technology at the Topper site, assessing lithic attribute variation and regional patterns of technological organization. Let's just put something here on the table. How do you define this, what's referred to as the mixed assemblage problem? Because that's one of the issues we're seeing at Topper and kind of what we're talking about. You've got chert, you've got a lot of different people who are coming there to get it over a long period of time, but you're also finding stuff like James just pointed out that isn't from Topper at all. You've got a whole lot of dynamics going on at Topper. What is the mixed assemblage problem, as they call it?
Exactly. So one of the things I wanted to do with the paper that you just mentioned, blade technology, so many people focus on projectile points, arrowheads, Clovis points. I wanted to look at a little bit about some different types of some different types of artifacts that we had that we're finding at Topper, specifically Clovis blades, and how they might relate to basically how do we define what a Clovis blade is. Out west, I believe Mike Collins has defined blades focusing a lot on their length, as well as some other technological attributes. But one of the characteristics is they're pretty long, about 100 millimeters or so in length. And obviously at Topper, we were finding Clovis blades, but they were a little bit smaller, tended to be smaller than what they were being found elsewhere. And we were like, well, are these actually Clovis blades, or are they something else? And they're actually, what we found is it's a byproduct of the raw material package size that we had at the site was really kind of dictating the length and the size of these artifacts that we were finding. And one of the things I also did with that study is kind of look at how do we define a blade or distinguish it from the other flakes and the other blade-like flakes that we might find on a site. How do we define what exactly constitutes a blade? So I came up with like kind of an attribute analysis score where you take multiple attributes and not just one single attribute to help define these artifact types.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that in a minute too. Really quickly, just also to kind of clear this for those who may be collectors or fairly new to this. When we're talking about Clovis technologies or Clovis blades, if we were talking about projectile points, obviously a identifying factor would be that flute. But when we're talking about blades, we're talking about again, much simpler technologies, not always bifacial, sometimes literally just a piece of stone that's knocked off of a fracture point on a piece of chert that still has a purpose as a tool. What are the different kinds of, generally speaking, tool forms that we might see that are being found there at Topper? I mean, you're going to find these any place, but with all of the abundance of lithic material to work with at Topper, what are the kinds of things you're looking for, and what are the uses of the blade technologies?
Yes, so blades would have been struck from a what we call a core. A massive rock that would have been brought down to a manageable size, and then you would have struck off long linear flakes, or linear typically about twice their length than their width, and then these would have produced a very sharp cutting edge, or a very sharp slicing surface that could have been modified over time as they would become dull through use. And again, these would have been used to like scrape hides and such those types of those types of activities. And again, at Topper, we found evidence of because it's a quarry. Again, we didn't see a lot of evidence of actually modified or used blades. What we ended up seeing were that a lot of the blades that were there were the discards of the manufacture process. People were making blades at the site and then carrying them elsewhere. So what we found, I did a study looking at the distribution of blades throughout the region that looked like they were possibly Clovis. And what we found is that the modified used blades tended to occur for the most part in areas that were off-site.
So, Doug, when we're looking at the blades that are found off-site, are we seeing, what are we looking for as far as features? Are we seeing edge retouch? Are we seeing polish? Are we seeing any type of indicator of use on those blades that are not found at the quarry site?
Typically what we find is modification in the sense of retouch, where these have been retooled or repurposed in the sense that they've been used. They might not have as sharp as an edge as they may have once had, so they've been reflaked down to a sharper. They'd have a sharper edge that could be used once again. What we also see is that those blades that are found further and further off-site tend to be shorter than the ones that we find at the quarry sites, shorter and then also used to a larger extent. And that would make sense if people are traveling further and further away from the quarry over time through their settlement subsistence pattern, and then probably discarding those blades at distances from the site.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense for what you would expect. Now, I do have a question. Those blades that have been found off-site, what type of context were they found in? Were they found in excavations, or were they just found as surface finds?
All of those, or most of those that we have so far that I analyzed, were found on the surface or in collections.
And that makes perfect sense. But getting back to the Topper site itself, now one thing that makes it so interesting, but also in many ways controversial, is the pre-Clovis material that is found at the site. Now, there was a paper published by yourself and Dr. Albert Goodyear called The Pre-Clovis Occupation of the Topper Site, Allendale County, South Carolina. And so I want to turn the conversation for the next few minutes to the pre-Clovis implements found there, and talk a little bit about that, because it's obviously what makes the site so interesting from that standpoint. Now, the pre-Clovis lithic assemblage is found in an area known as the White Pleistocene alluvial sands. And these particular artifacts that are found are often looked at as not truly artifacts. I've heard them described as some people would say as geofacts. But having looked at these implements yourself personally and spent a good time doing so, what is your impression of the pre-Clovis layers of the Topper site?
Oh boy.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
I was going to say, he's on the spot now.
Yeah. So my study, my research at Topper, what I wanted to do for my dissertation was kind of look at the origin of the lithic materials that had been identified as flakes from the lower deposits, the Pleistocene sands and terrace at the site, and then also to test the role of human agency in the manufacture of what have been termed by Dr. Al Goodyear as bin breaks. Going back to the flakes, what I wanted to look at is if these artifacts are falling down, bioturbating down from the Clovis deposits and then coming through into the older deposits of the site. In that case, if that were the case, then these flakes would just be Clovis flakes that are falling through the cracks. To get at some of the actually implements and artifacts you mentioned a moment ago, a lot has been discussed about bin breaks and bin break technology by Al Goodyear at the site. I also want to kind of talk a little bit about the flake tools that we have at the site as well that may not get as much of, I guess, they might not get as much talk about them, but there are a significant amount of flake tools that we have at the site that are pretty incredible, and these are found in the Pleistocene sands, what I call the lower Pleistocene sands, at the site.
Roughly what date are we talking about, by the way, there, Doug?
Oh, sorry. Come again?
What date are we talking about when you refer to the lower Pleistocene sands?
Okay,
20,000?
This would probably be, and again, that's one thing about the site is we're still working out some of the dating issues at the site. But again, this is probably, I'd say, if you go by the dating that we have so far, probably at least 20,000 years old.
Right.
So again, what I found through some of my research is that you have the Clovis levels, and then you have below Clovis, you have a layer of upper Pleistocene sands. And this is what I refer to: upper Pleistocene, lower Pleistocene. This is not the geologic age of upper and lower Pleistocene.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to know what period we're talking about, because this is your terminology, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I was super confused. I'm not gonna lie.
That's okay.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We're all on the same page. Yeah. Jump in there, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
now.
These flakes are stratigraphically separated. You see these in the lower Pleistocene sands, and you don't see a high percentage at all in the upper Pleistocene sands. So if these were coming down from the Clovis levels above, you would expect to see them, the entire sequence down, and then diminishing in quantity through time. But that's not what you see. You see the Clovis level, you see a level of not many at all, and then you see an abundance in the lower Pleistocene sands, and then resting on the terrace surface, along with a lot of flake tools. You also don't have any evidence of biface technology in the lower Pleistocene sands or on the terrace surface. So if these artifacts are or were Clovis artifacts that had come down through these deposits, is nature just selecting against biface technology in this process?
Those are really interesting points, because, again, if redeposition is occurring, then it's not going to be a selective process. I mean, I might imagine that smaller stone particulates perhaps are going to be more likely to be able to filter down through levels of sand, etc., but evidently everything that you found that could be attributed to the Clovis culture that was recovered from Topper, I mean, it was in the stratum that you would expect to find it. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Now, you do have a little bit of possible winnowing of the Clovis materials into some of the upper Pleistocene sands. But then once you get down into the lower Pleistocene sands, we don't see a lot of evidence we don't really see any bifaces at all. We have one biface, I believe, from the upper Pleistocene sands, and incidentally enough, that artifact resembles it resembles most closely a preform that you would possibly find at Cactus Hill, one of the possible, Miller points, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Miller Point, which is what is also described by Dr. James Adavasio at the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, that same style. So we have, is that what you're saying? Is that same style of projectile point that seems to indicate to be found at Topper?
It appears vaguely similar. It's a preform. It's not finished. It's but it's about the same morphology. It doesn't look as much like Clovis as it does more similar to a possible preform for a Miller point.
Right. Okay. The thing about the Miller points too is, I mean, it's a fairly, I think it's safe to say this, guys, a fairly indistinct point type. And hence you've got fewer diagnostics. Of course, there's no evidence of fluting or anything like that. It is similar, however, to certain surface finds, as I understand it, that have been recovered in Pennsylvania and the surrounding regions. I don't remember the name of that particular type. Doug, maybe you or Jason do, but again, when we're talking about something similar to the Miller type, again, if we're talking about that famous pre-Clovis point from the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, that could compare hypothetically to a lot of different point types, right?
It could, yes.
Yeah, it really is a kind of nondescript point, and we'll just say that its description in its understanding is still somewhat controversial even to this day. But something that I found looking at the what we would call pre-Clovis artifacts from Topper, one thing that I found that, to me, looking at it in real life, in person, that was not controversial was the graver spur. So we have a bend break with an obvious graver spur. And to me, out of everything, when we were able to see the artifacts presented by Dr. Albert Goodyear, out of everything that we saw, the big, beautiful Clovis preforms and all of the wonderful pieces that came from Topper, I found this bend break graver spur to be the most interesting. And to me, it's controversial as to whether or not it's pre-Clovis. Maybe it was redeposited, but for me, it was definitely made by a human hand. What is your thoughts on this particular piece, Doug?
Exactly. So, first of all, let me back up a bit and explain what a bend break is. These are pieces of chert that have been snapped, and the goal is to get a sharp angle that can be used for grooving or gouging or cutting different types of materials. So they've got a sharp 90-degree angle on them. This piece in question, we found it was at least, I'd say, 10 to 15 centimeters into the Pleistocene terrace formation at the site, and it had a graver spur on the end of the piece that had been modified, and I believe we've also got some possible evidence of chipping that we were able to see when we did some microwear analysis on the piece also.
You know, we were talking about the Pleistocene, upper and lower Pleistocene sands, and I was totally confused. And then I realized, okay, I know what you're talking about now. But, you know, for the listeners, the way that the Topper side is set up, you know, I talked earlier about that, you know, it's kind of like that rolling hill terrain there. And those ridges are oriented north-south, and on the south end, they're truncated by the Savannah River. Well, as you come down to the Topper side, you sort of come off the end of one of those ridges, kind of down this hill and then down onto this big, broad river terrace. So, and then the terrace is about, I don't know, guys, what do you think, like 15 feet maybe above the Savannah River, the, you know, really steep slope right into the water. But that river terrace is about, I don't know, 100 yards wide, maybe. I mean, it's pretty broad. But over time, this sand, this Pleistocene age sand that forms these hills, works its way down hill onto the river terrace. And you've got different layers that sort of just kind of work their way down over time. That process is called mass wasting, by the way. But this soil just creeps down, and it, you know, all of these fragments and whatever's in the soil travels with it over time. And it makes for somewhat of a puzzle, I guess, when you try to, you know, go back and excavate down through that. So the Topper excavation itself is down in the river terrace, kind of on the toe of the slope. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, it may not be a dynamic site in the sense that stones could have easily fallen off of a cliff, for instance, down into a ravine. That could explain breakages and things along those lines, but it certainly is a dynamic site in the sense that there's a lot of potential for the movement of soil, and you find that. But again, the hint, I would say, is the indication that the clearly and distinctive Clovis technology is found where it is expected to be found, and the same with other cultural manifestations there at the Topper site, which wouldn't entirely rule out the idea of redeposition, but it would certainly make it less likely, I would think. Doug, in your opinion, though, again, you know, we've been there with Dr. Goodyear, and actually at the Salkehatchie campus site where he has now some of those preforms and also the so-called Big Red on display. Now, Big Red really was interesting to me. Most people would look at that and would not find that maybe as impressive, since it's not some sort of a diagnostic point. It's not an actual tool per se. Here we have a large core, a piece of chert that was repeatedly struck, and it shows mechanical striking and breaking, or appears to. Now, some have argued those factors could be accounted for through natural means. When I'm looking at, and I remember the aha moment, I mean, we were there, we were talking with Dr. Goodyear, we filmed this for the documentary that we put together, the team on YouTube, as I'm editing the video, and you have to go back and watch it over and over and over again, and as I'm seeing Dr. Goodyear continue to explain the dynamics of the breakage points on Big Red, I'm like, oh my gosh, I see exactly what he's saying. It really seems difficult to account for that apart from someone striking repeatedly until an actual break occurs. And then again, the multiple different fracture zones, the areas, the angles of approach, to say that is accounted for through nature, again, I won't say anything's impossible, but it seems a lot more difficult to explain it that way than to explain it as a process of human hands.
Right.
Look at sites like Galt. I mean, now they're finding diagnostic points that appear to be in the same strata, but again, it doesn't seem as controversial now as the point I'm making. So the idea that human hands could have actually produced what we found at sites like Topper, maybe if it wasn't accepted initially, perhaps it actually warrants a second look now in light of more recent discoveries.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot more to be found at Topper. A lot more to be learned from Topper. It has a lot more to teach us. But going back, one thing I wanted to point out about the site location itself, we'd mentioned the possibility of materials moving down the hill slope over time. It's interesting that the quarry is probably several hundred meters in extent north-south. If items were falling down the hill over time, again, and these materials were coming down and being responsible for the deposition of the pre-Clovis artifacts, you would expect them to occur along the entirety of the extent of that quarry, and that's not the case. We've actually put some test units into the north of the area where we found pre-Clovis at Topper, and we have not. We haven't found evidence of that upstream, below, which is still below the quarry itself.
That's interesting. So there's actually a good case to be made that you aren't finding as much. I mean, there are going to be dynamics, but it's not going to be as dynamic as some critics have argued.
Well, I was just thinking back over some of the previous episodes that we've done, and we're talking about pre-Clovis here, which in itself is beginning to grab more acceptance, but it's still controversial at this point. And I know that there's some out there that look at pre-Clovis sites, generally speaking, as maybe not pre-Clovis, but maybe at the very beginning or onset of the Clovis occupation, if you will. The thing that's unique, or really unique, about Topper is if things like what we call the Big Red, so that large core that we just described to you, if that truly is completed by the hand of a human being, then that shoots that theory completely out of the water, because we're talking about great antiquity. We're not talking about anywhere in that designation of what we call the Clovis onset. So again, when we often refer on this show back to the Topper site, and here we are talking about it again, is because there's these anomalies at the site, such as the Big Red core, that can't be explained by the early onset of Clovis. Doug, what are your thoughts on that?
So you have three important kind of analytic variables when you're talking about what I see pre-Clovis at Topper. So number one, are the presumed artifacts cultural, and is the context good? And then number two, is there evidence to support the accuracy of the dating and the geochronology? And then number three, is our current theory postulating the timing and origins of human settlement in North America correct? So if we accept, for example, that people were not in the region earlier than Clovis, then either issues with the cultural affinity of the lithic assemblage itself or the dating of the site could be incorrect. But if the lithic technology and the geochronology at Topper have been interpreted correctly, then it kind of follows that people were occupying the region much earlier than the current well-accepted colonization models might suggest.
Yeah. It seems to me like there are kind of two different areas that aren't necessarily fighting so much anymore as it once had been. Those who argued the Clovis first model, and those who were saying there was someone here much earlier. And the idea to me is nowadays what we're seeing, and we call pre-Clovis is the upper margin of Clovis. And then there are those who are still saying, well, no, we've established pre-Clovis and we need to keep working with that model. I almost see now a convergence of kind of those who grew out of the Clovis first model and who didn't hang on to it, were willing to accept new data, but are still trying to fit that somehow, to reconcile it, maybe is a better term, with the existing Clovis model, but expand that period going back further and not identify it exclusively in relation to the material technology that we identify exclusively with Clovis, the fluted projectile point. This, of course, brings us to that other issue. Okay, culture versus technology. I mean, Jason and and James, we've had this conversation so many times. I'm beyond a point of really being able to say that I think we're talking about a culture when we describe Clovis. I mean, what we have recognized as Clovis is a technology. What we must accept with the abundance of the evidence, even if we're still trying to figure out how early they arrived, there were people here much earlier than the fluted technology we identify with Clovis. And so we're having to expand those models, and I'm seeing a convergence of different attitudes which are gradually getting to a point of maybe reconciling with that idea that, hey, look, whoever it was and whatever they were doing here, they were just here earlier. And we have to understand the dynamics of the different kind of technological revolutions that were occurring among extant populations that were in North America already.
Yeah, so the new controversy is not so much Clovis versus pre-Clovis, but it's, okay, there was obviously someone here very early on. So are we looking at the very first vestiges of Clovis, or are we looking at something that was prior to that? So rather before Clovis, rather than the term that we normally use, pre-Clovis, because then the question becomes, how far back is pre?
Makes perfect sense. Doug, listen, I want to thank you again for jumping on the mic with us and kind of having this roundtable conversation tonight. What's new for you? Where are you headed? I know you're out there on the road in the middle of these weird times, and it's all the more important to us that you were able to join us tonight since you're kind of on the go. But where are you headed, and what will you be doing?
Well, like I said, I'm still working on my these CRM projects right now. I'm also in the process of turning my dissertation into a monograph, which hopefully will be out sometime soon at some point. And then again, you never know. I'd like to eventually maybe get back into some topper related stuff. I really believe that the site still has a story to tell. We know what we've learned about the site so far. Again, there's still more to be done there. And obviously, if there were people occupying that site prior to Clovis, that's obviously not the only place they were. They would have been elsewhere, and it would be really interesting to see if we could find evidence of that elsewhere as well.
It certainly would be. And if not in that elsewhere that we're still searching for, perhaps we'll see you there at Topper. Doug, thanks. And we hope that you'll join us again sometime here on the 7 Ages Audio Journal.
Thank you for having me.
Well, yet another great interview there with Doug. Doug is a friend of the show, great guy to talk with. I've had some good conversations with him. Micah, you and I, obviously met him in person for the first time at the Southeastern Archaeological Conference that we presented at. And, since then we've talked quite a bit and learned more about his research, and he's learned more about our research. And he's just one of those down-to-earth guys, very humble, but very, very talented. And so we were very much looking forward to having him on the show, and it was a great experience. So thanks for joining us, Doug, and we look forward to our future conversations.
Oh, we certainly do, and I hope yet again, once things return to some semblance of normalcy, maybe we will run back into him and some of our other friends out there on the road. Hey, guys, listen, in the weeks to come, we have some big names that will be making appearances right here on our humble little podcast. I don't think it's too early to announce the return of J.M. Adovasio. That's right. Now, as far as archaeologists who have been influential on me, he's probably at the top of the list. His were some of the first books, at least as it relates to Paleoindian archaeology in America, that I read. And his writings gave me a totally different perspective, not only on the archaeological process, but many of the things that are often left out of discussion of archaeology. And that, of course, has a lot to do with the role women play in archaeology, perishable materials which are lost more often than, of course, stone and other durable materials. So you don't find them as often, but they played an integral role in the way of life for ancient Americans and really for people all around the world. So I really can't wait to get him back on the microphone. And actually, this is a more formal podcast kind of interview. The first time that we spoke with Dr. Adovasio, it was actually an on-camera interview, and we have that linked on our YouTube channel. So go look for 7 Ages Research on YouTube. That would be good homework in advance of this in-depth conversation we're about to have with Dr. Adovasio. It's been a long time coming. Really looking forward to getting him back. And guys, like I mentioned, I've been sitting here now for close to an hour and a half with an empty glass. I'd really like to get over here to this bar and pony up. So gentlemen, why don't you join me, as is tradition, for one more round?
Yeah, we have to put this crying shame of an empty glass to rest. This cannot stand.
That's right.
This is unacceptable. Unacceptable.
Yeah, well, there was so much water falling from the sky outside tonight, I thought that any more wetness in here and we might drown. So, yeah, now we can safely do so. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, always drink responsibly. And on behalf of your friends here at the 7 Ages Audio Journal, he is geologist James Waldo. He is environmental scientist and avocational archaeologist extraordinaire Jason Pentrail. And I am Micah Hanks. And of course, as always, we enjoy being here with you guys. Follow us on social media. And by all means, make sure to drop in again here at the Crosstown Pub. We'll see you again here on the 7 Ages Audio Journal.